The train ticket that never expired. The October wind swept across the Lancaster County hills like a mournful whistle, rattling the sugar maples that lined the Strasburg Railroad's old gravel path. Chester Chet Lapp stood alone at the edge of Paradise Cemetery, his gnarled hands clutching a faded 1973 ticket stub, Evelyn's first ride with him as his bride. At 78, his back was bent from 50 years of leaning out locomotive windows, his eyes clouded by cataracts and grief. The casket, simple pine, the way Evelyn wanted, was being lowered into the red Pennsylvania clay. His wife of 48 years was gone, taken by a stroke in the night. And yet the deepest cut was still coming. The graveside service was small, just family and the railroad crew who'd known Evelyn since she was a girl selling lemonade at the station platform. Chet wore his dress conductor's uniform, navy wool with brass buttons dulled by decades, the same one he'd worn when he punched her ticket every single morning of their marriage. He had punched it religiously, 6:17 a.m. sharp, whether she was riding to market or simply sitting in the parlor car sipping tea while he ran the throttle. "Keeps me honest," she'd laugh, tucking the little cardboard square into her apron pocket like a love letter. Their granddaughter Sadie, 29, stood at the head of the grave in a charcoal coat, her auburn hair whipping across her tear-streaked face. She was a travel blogger now, always chasing sunsets in Santorini or Marrakesh, but she'd flown home from Lisbon the moment the hospital called. Chet had raised her after her parents died in a derailment on the Northeast Corridor when she was 6. She'd grown up in the railroad cottage, falling asleep to the distant wail of steam whistles. Sadie's voice cracked as she began her eulogy. "Grandma Evelyn taught me that every journey matters, even the short ones." Chet's chest swelled, he waited for her to mention him, the man who'd driven every mile of those journeys. But then her gaze drifted to the front row of folding chairs, where a stranger sat in a vintage conductor's cap and a camel hair coat. "There's someone I need to thank," Sadie continued, voice trembling. "Someone who was Grandma's true co-pilot, who kept her engine running when the rest of us were too busy to notice. Mr. Vincent Gray." A collective gasp rippled through the mourners. Every head turned. Vincent Gray rose slowly, 60 years old, silver-haired, impeccably groomed, his smile practiced and sorrowful. He removed his cap and pressed it to his heart. The whisper spread like wildfire, "That's the man from Philadelphia, the one restoring the 1906 Baldwin locomotive." Chet felt the ground tilt beneath his boots. Vincent Gray had appeared 2 years ago, offering to save the Strasburg's historic rolling stock. Evelyn had spent hours with him in the roundhouse, poring over blueprints. Chet had thought nothing of it. Evelyn loved trains the way other women loved gardens. Vincent was family, Sadie said, tears falling freely now. He understood Grandma's dreams in a way no one else ever did. Chet's knees buckled. He gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. Family. The word echoed like a runaway freight car. He looked at Sadie, his Sadie, and saw only Vincent reflected in her eyes. That evening, in the law office above the Strasburg pharmacy, the air smelled of liniment and old paper. Attorney Melvin Stoltzfus, 75 and half-deaf, adjusted his bifocals and read the will in a monotone that made every syllable feel like a spike through Chet's heart. Pursuant to the last will and testament of Evelyn May Lapp, signed 14 months ago, the 1882 railroad cottage, the antique rolling stock collection valued at $1,600,000, and the lifetime free ride pass issued to Chester Lapp in 1975, are hereby bequeathed to Mr. Vincent Aloysius Gray. Chet's ears rang. The cottage, their cottage, with the crooked porch where Evelyn rocked Sadie to sleep. The lifetime pass, he'd punched it himself on their wedding day, laminated it in the station office, and slipped it into her Bible. And the rolling stock, 12 cars he'd restored with his own hands, including the 1877 parlor car where he'd proposed. Stoltzfus cleared his throat. There are minor bequests to the Strasburg Railroad Museum, but the bulk of the estate goes to Mr. Gray. Chet turned to Sadie. She sat rigid, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. "You knew," he rasped. Sadie's voice was barely audible. "Grandma wanted the trains preserved properly. Vincent promised her." "Preserved?" Chet's laugh cracked like dry kindling. "I preserved them every damn day for 50 years while you were off chasing Instagram likes." He stormed out into the cold. The bells at the grade crossing clanged as the 5:15 excursion train rumbled past, its steam plume blowing orange in the dusk. Chet stood on the platform until the red marker lamps disappeared around the bend, the same way Evelyn used to wait for him every night. Back at the cottage, the silence was a living thing. Evelyn's rocking chair sat empty by the pot-bellied stove. Her apron still hung on the hook, the pocket bulging with ticket stubs, 48 years worth. Chet poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a jelly jar, then poured a second for the empty chair. He drank both. He slept in his uniform, cap and all, and woke before dawn with the taste of coal smoke in his mouth. The cottage felt like a museum of someone else's life. He wandered to the old signal box behind the roundhouse, a 10-by-10 shack where conductors once logged mileposts. Evelyn had turned it into her office the last few years, claiming she needed quiet to write grants for Vincent's restoration projects. The door was locked. Chet hadn't had the key since she changed the tumbler 2 winters ago. He fetched the crowbar from the tool shed and pried the hasp. Inside, the air smelled of ink and lilac talc. Her conductor's logbook lay open on the desk, its pages filled with her neat schoolgirl cursive. But something was wrong. The margins were crowded with microscopic pencil notes, dates, mile markers, dollar amounts. Chet's hands shook as he lifted the book. The entries began 7 years ago, the year Evelyn's arthritis flared and she stopped writing with him. He flipped to the final page and found it glued shut. With trembling fingers he steamed it open over the tea kettle. Inside was a single Polaroid, Evelyn in her hospice bed, gaunt but smiling, holding a tiny brass model of the 1906 locomotive. On the back, in her spidural scrawl, "For Chet, our forever destination. If Vincent ever claims my rails, give this to the judge." Beneath the photo lay a second will, witnessed by Nurse Abigail Fisher, dated 3 weeks before Evelyn's death. And a microcassette labeled "Play Only If I'm Gone." Chet drove to the Railroad Museum where old Ben Fisher, Abigail's father and retired rail detective, kept a 1980s dictaphone in a drawer. They sat in the back room among dusty lanterns and listened. Evelyn's voice, thin but steady, "Chet, my love." Vincent lied. "He told me you didn't care about the trains anymore, that you wanted to sell everything and move to Florida. I was so scared of losing our legacy I signed the first will. But then I saw the bank statements. He's been siphoning donations, hundreds of thousands, through fake restoration invoices. Sadie helped him catalog, thought she was saving the railroad. Forgive her. Forgive me. The real will is with Nurse Abby. Come home, conductor. Your train is waiting." Chet played it thrice. Each time the pain sharpened, then softened, like a blade being honed. He hired Ruthann Stoltzfus, Melvin's niece, a bulldog attorney from Lancaster who wore cowboy boots under her suits. She listened to the tape, studied the logbook, and grinned like a wolf scenting blood. "We're gonna blow the whistle so loud Vincent will hear it in Philadelphia." The next months were war. Chet and Ben traced every mile marker in Evelyn's margins, abandoned sidings, forgotten water towers, each one corresponding to a fraudulent invoice. Vincent had routed donations through a shell company called Gray & Sons Locomotive Works. The total, $1.62 million. Sadie refused to speak to Chet. She posted Instagram stories from Vincent's restored parlor car, captioning them "Honoring Grandma's Vision." The likes poured in. Chet's heart calcified. The trial began on a sleeting February morning. The Lancaster County Courthouse smelled of wet wool and varnish. Vincent took the stand in a 3-piece suit, voice smooth as greased rails. Mrs. Lapp was distraught. Mr. Lapp had expressed desire to sell the collection. "I was merely honoring her wishes." Ruthann waited until the courtroom was silent, then produced the 1877 steam whistle from the Strasbourg Museum. She handed it to Chet. "Mr. Lapp, would you demonstrate how conductors signal fraud on the line?" Chet put the whistle to his lips and blew, 3 long, 1 short. The blast reverberated off the oak paneling, rattling the windows. Jurors jumped. Vincent went white. Ruthann played the dictaphone. Evelyn's voice filled the room, frail but fierce. Gasps echoed. Sadie, in the back row, began to sob. Chet took the stand last. His voice was gravel and steam. "I punched her ticket every morning for 48 years. That was our marriage vow. Vincent Gray punched holes in her trust instead. "I want my wife's rails back." The judge, a rail fan who'd ridden behind Chet as a boy, ruled in 90 minutes. Vincent ordered to repay every cent, plus interest. The collection seized. Gray and Sons dissolved. Vincent left the courthouse in handcuffs. Tax fraud charges followed like boxcars. Chet thought justice would feel sweeter. It tasted like ash. Spring came early that year. The crabapple trees along the tracks burst pink. Chet sat on the cottage porch every evening, rocking in Evelyn's chair, the lifetime pass pinned to his suspenders like a medal no one else could see. One April dusk, a familiar diesel horn sounded, 2 longs, 1 short. Sadie's rental car pulled into the gravel drive. She stepped out carrying a duffel and a box of vinyl records, Evelyn's old jazz 78s. Her eyes were red, her influencer glow replaced by chapped cheeks and sleepless shadows. "I sold everything," she whispered. "The cameras, the sponsors. I'd been living in Vincent's guest house. He told me you were jealous, that you never loved the trains the way Grandma did." Her voice broke. "I believed him because it was easier than admitting I'd abandoned you both." Chet said nothing. He simply opened the screen door. They worked in silence for weeks. Sadie learned to fire the 1906 locomotive under Chet's stern eye. Coal smoke stained her designer coats. She scrubbed rust from the parlor car where Evelyn once served tea in bone china. At night they sat on the porch, listening to the ticks of cooling iron. One evening Sadie brought out the tiny brass model from the Polaroid. "Grandma had this engraved on the bottom," she said, turning it over. Chet squinted in the lantern light. "See Annie Lapp, together forever, full steam ahead." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, first time since the funeral. Sadie rested her head on his shoulder the way she did when she was 6 and afraid of thunder. The Railroad Museum reopened the line in June. Tourists packed the platform. Chet, in his dress uniform now pressed and gleaming, stood at the throttle of the restored 1906. Sadie, in a conductor's cap 2 sizes too big, punched tickets with trembling hands. At the far end of the run, where the tracks curved through wildflower meadows, Chet cut the steam. The engine sighed like a sleeping giant. He stepped onto the gangway and pulled the lifetime pass from his pocket, the original 1973 stub, worn soft as cloth. Sadie joined him. The wind carried the scent of honeysuckle and hot iron. "Grandpa," she said, voice steady for the first time in years, "punch mine?" Chet took a fresh cardboard ticket from his vest, fed it into the old hand punch. Click. Click. The date, June 15, 2025. He handed it to her. "This one never expires," he said. Sadie tucked it into her shirt pocket, right over her heart. Then she reached for the whistle cord and gave 3 long pulls that rolled across the valley like a wedding march. Far away, in the cottage garden, the crabapple tree Evelyn planted the year Sadie was born burst into bloom, pink as a bride's blush, strong as a locomotive's heartbeat. And somewhere, in whatever station waits beyond the last milepost, Evelyn smiled and punched her own ticket, destination, home. Moral of the story. Some journeys look like they've been derailed forever, but the strongest tracks are forged in the hottest fire. Love, like steam, never truly dies, it simply waits for the right heart to pull the throttle and carry it forward, full steam ahead, into eternity. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, it really helps. Watch the full video for more details.